Okay, delighted to welcome onto the programme now a psychotherapist, author and coach, Kelley Traverner. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have you back on the programme again.
As ever, always look forward to talking with you.
Thanks so very much indeed. Listen, often we talk about relationships, and we will, because we'll get to people's questions. But I mean, every relationship, I think, is going to be affected by external influences. And we've just come through the COVID pandemic, and it was very, very tough and an awful lot for people to... we're still going through it, but for an awful lot of people to cope with. But you were able to sort of have some control over that situation, I think, and that might have helped people. Now, we seemingly out of that, and we're straight into an existential crisis. We don't know where this is going to go, and we are out of control. We can feel out of control in it. How do we? Have you any tips on how we can cope with this? Because people will be reading the news and wondering where this is going to go and what kind of world we actually could end up living in. This could scale up to something like most of us have never seen before, Kelley.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we need to take responsibility for, and it's very difficult, is how much news we consume, because it's having a massive impact. It's starting to show up in the therapy room. And the reality is, if we just perpetually watch it and go from app to app to app, keeping up to date, I have many clients who are from Europe who speak different languages, and I'm beginning to realize they're also watching the news in their various, home language, and it's all creating increased mental health problems, anxiety, panic attacks. And so one way is to try to limit some of your exposure to the news, that maybe you choose a particular time of day. That's also about auditing your phones, because if you're getting news alerts and updates, that's not particularly helpful. And again, just like the pandemic, even though it is different, it is uncertain times. And uncertainty is very difficult for humans, because we like to have often the illusion of control. And that's one of the reasons why, when situations are unsettling, it can be so detrimental. But it's to know that, we've come through the pandemic. We're on the other side hopefully, and let's, and I guess some of this we're just going to have to watch as it plays out. Literally.
And I suppose too, we have to understand that, look, your BBC News, your Sky News, and what have you. This programme, obviously, we discuss current affairs, so it's going to feature on this programme. Whilst that programme is always there, you don't always have to consume it either.
No.
Even I, as someone who works in the media, I will, as much as I can, switch off. I'm struggling more so with this crisis than I have with previous crises, but you have to, as you say, it's the perfect advice, I think. Just because the information is there, just because it's being broadcast, it's there for you to tune in when it suits you. It's not there for you to sit there absorbing it constantly, because none of us could insulate ourselves then from the stress and anxiety. I don't think any of us could be strong enough if we were constantly bombarding ourselves with it.
That is what's happening. And that is one of the factors that are, starting to show up in the room more often. Panic attacks, especially for people, who are closer to the countries surrounding the Ukraine. And that's totally understandable. Mm. And again, we have got the skills, we have developed them through the pandemic, about taking more responsibility for ourselves, our own well-being, focusing on what you can control. Is there a humanitarian group in your area? Are there things that you can do? Because we know sitting there consuming isn't good. So what action might you be able to take? What causes might there be available to you where you can assist? So that helplessness, despair, worry and fret and the pessimism doesn't take over you, because it's a real issue.
For sure. And you're talking about it on a countrywide scale, and I agree, and I can understand that too. But if things get even more tense, you're going to see a difference between how someone in Glasgow might be dealing with it compared to London, because obviously, London is the capital, and God forbid if things were ever to escalate, you would start seeing an increase in anxiety in our capital cities. Okay. Right. Okay. Great advice. Let's get to some other questions, if that's okay, Kelley. My best friend is married to a man who tracks her every move. She was talking to us all about leaving him. The next thing is she's pregnant. She's clearly very unhappy. The other day I met her for coffee. We had planned to go to one place. It was packed, so we went elsewhere. He was immediately on the phone asking her where she was and why she wasn't where she said she would be. She was clearly embarrassed and wanted the call to end. The next thing, he asked her to switch the phone to camera so we could see where she was and who she was with afterwards. She cried with embarrassment. What do I do to help her? Clearly, this woman needs to get out of this situ ASAP. But what can her friends do to assist her, I wonder, Kelley?
In situations like that, it is about encouraging people to seek some professional support, letting them know about helplines that are available to them, domestic abuse helpline, Samaritans, signposting, and endeavoring to not be judgmental, which isn't always easy, because, you know, naturally we care about our friends and we don't want our friends in certain situations, but endeavoring to not be judgmental and to understand it's complex. It's really complex. Lives are, you know, relationships are formed, pregnancy. So it's tricky, and that can be really difficult for friends. But signposting is fundamental.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out too, at least in this country, that is actual criminal behaviour. That is coercive control, which is actually a crime here, and there have been convictions not only in our part of the world but nationally as well. How to handle in-laws that refuse to speak. Sorry, it's just in-laws. As soon as I see that word, I don't know, I go back to Carry On films or something, but this is very serious. How to handle in-laws that refuse to speak to you in front of your children. They'll go out of their way to make you feel worthless, but my other sister-in-law is the best thing since sliced bread. That's a horrible situation.
So just run that by me again.
Yeah, so this person, their in-laws refuse to speak to them in front of their children. I don't understand the significance of in front of the children, and they'll go out of their way to make them feel worthless. But there's another sister-in-law, and they treat her like the best thing. So, basically, really, she doesn't understand, or he doesn't understand why his in-laws dislike him or her, but I presume it's a her. But there's another sister that she's obviously the golden child, sister-in-law.
Well, the dynamic is, what do you need to do to protect yourself from that situation? Often, if you challenge people when they're treating you poorly, they may deny it. They may try and act like, well, Dana, what's wrong with you? So, you know, you may have a conversation with your partner about, have you noticed your parents are a little bit off with me? See where that goes. And if not, think about what choices you need to make to protect yourself. Because if you're at the bottom of the totem pole, and that's been an issue throughout your life, you know, not being regarded, being overlooked, this can tap into bigger self-esteem issues. And taking responsibility for yourself, therefore kindly declining invitations where you're going to be subjected to this kind of behavior is in your best interest, and may well be discomfortable for everybody else if you're not agreeable. However, if you're in situations where you're being ill-treated, undermined, overlooked, again, it's our responsibility to look after ourselves.
Yeah, my husband has lost all interest in sex. Now, the caller says he's 100% not seeing anyone else. Now, obviously, you might say they need to talk about this, but the problem is the caller wants to know, how do I get him to talk about why this part of our life is dead? So how do you get him to engage in the conversation to try and find some sort of resolution? Because as we've said before, you don't know what might be going on in his mind.
Absolutely not. And it can be a taboo subject. It can be a subject that evokes embarrassment. I think the challenge is to have the conversation about the impact it's having on you, and encourage the individual to either seek help, professional help, maybe going to the doctors. Is something wrong downstairs? Do they tend to avoid? But again, to avoid the conversation means that there's only going to be a build-up. And what's going to be the impact on your own libido? You know, there's usually a kind of a long-term consequence for that.
Because it's not just a physical act, it's an emotional act as well.
Absolutely. And it's an important part of any, you know, intimate relationship. And if you're both at the same point where you both don't want sex and that works for you, whoopee-doo. But if you're not, it can be particularly problematic and, you know, quite symbolic in terms of when the sex goes out of a relationship. That's a very interesting time.
Yeah, all right. Just time for one more, Kelley. I've started dating a man. We're in our early 30s. Before this relationship, I had a bad breakup and some unfulfilling flings, so I want to hold back from having sex for a while. However, he seems to be losing patience with me and says we need to know if we're compatible in the bedroom as well in the rest of our relationship. Am I wrong to delay sex? My friends tell me I'm crazy because I don't. He'll find it elsewhere. Well, if he's not prepared to accept her on reasonable, I think they're reasonable terms, I think that's a nice early big red flag for her.
Yeah, well, it's her T's and C's, you know, and it can be very difficult to hold your boundary in relationships, especially if we've been waiting for Mr. Right to come along, and then we meet someone and we've made a choice that we're going to withhold, wait, delay sex, because often in the past we may have given it up too freely and those relationships haven't manifested. As ever, this is something to communicate to the partner in terms of your rationale, if you choose to, not that we always have to explain ourselves. And I guess the challenge is, if someone doesn't agree with that, is there space for compromise? I think it's about having the open dialogue, letting somebody know where you're coming from. But if that doesn't work for them and they're not prepared to wait, then sadly, that's where that relationship will kind of hit the buffers.
Kelley, thank you very much as always. Kelley is a psychotherapist, author and coach. If people want to check out more about you and your services, Kelley, how do they do so?
You can find me at keyforchange.com. You can use the number 4 or write FOR, keyforchange.com.
All right, stay happy, stay safe. Thanks, Kelley.